What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Blood on the Razor Wire TV. That Rayful Edmond story is a hell of a story, right? But there's another guy that got caught up in this case, Tony Lewis. Tony Lewis is serving life in prison. Everybody's getting out of prison, but Tony Lewis is still sitting in there fighting for his life, trying to get out. He's a man that went to prison young, 27 years old. He was a man that was out there getting money at the highest levels. According to court papers, he's the guy that was the co-defendant. He was the guy that was the right-hand man, the partner of Rayful Edmonds. But everybody knows Rayful Edmonds' story because of all the things that he's done. Not everybody knows Tony Lewis's story. So today we're going to get into Tony Lewis's story and how everyone else gets out of prison except for him. I say, free Tony Lewis. He's a good man. He deserves a second chance to reclaim his life, to be a father, a grandfather, a husband, a law-abiding citizen. And contrary to popular belief, not all DC dudes are bad dudes. Not all DC dudes are booty bandits, right? Tony Lewis is not any of those things. He's a man that deserves a second chance. But let's get into the story.
Just about everybody inside the jail in some way, shape, form, or fashion is dealing in drugs, either directly or indirectly.
He was caught and 2 years ago struck a deal with the feds. After he went to prison, he sold even more. Right here behind the concrete walls, steel bars, and locked doors of this maximum security. Following his conviction as a drug kingpin, Edmond was sentenced to 2 life terms without the possibility of parole. But within just days of his arrival, he was back in business. You'd know it would be inevitable if they'd come together.
No, I'm not sure that's true. I wouldn't make that assumption. I would think that both people, having been put in federal prison, would have been incapacitated.
But they weren't. A year after Edmond met him, Chicky was released
Oh, yeah.
from inside, I love maximum security penitentiary.
Security.
Specifically, how did you do it?
Specifically, we would use the visiting room, the telephones.
Right.
Will you accept the charge?
Uh-huh. The friend, in turn, connected him to Chicky all the way down in Medellin.
What reason would I be calling out the country? I'm not from Colombia or South America. Or
Here's an inmate that's calling Medellin.
And, I hope she'd be okay.
I feel very honored. I mean, he has life or 2 life sentences.
In the late 1980s, violence and drug trafficking stormed through Washington, D.C. Drug arrests rose dramatically. Homicides reached record levels. Millions of dollars of imported cocaine flooded the D.C. area. At the eye of the storm was Tony Lewis. Lewis dealt cocaine for a living, but Lewis was no street-level dealer, according to the judge. Instead, he helped manage the infamous Rayful Edmonds organization, one of the largest cocaine trafficking conspiracies in the history of the district. A joint force of DEA, FBI, and DC police officials had spent nearly 2 years building their case against the district's largest drug network, and a series of coordinated raids had been carefully planned. Law enforcement was coming to get their guys, and at the top of the list was Rayful Edmonds and Tony Lewis. On April 15, 1989, the police had shattered all of Tony's dreams, like a broken plate glass window. At 5:30 p.m., they put metal bracelets on his wrists at his home in Arlington. A few hours later, they nabbed the big prize, alleged ringleader Rayful Edmonds, at his girlfriend's house in the 900 block of Jefferson Street Northwest. With the 2 biggest targets in custody, law enforcement launched searches at more than a dozen other addresses in the district and Maryland, including Edmonds' grandmother's row house at 407 M Street Northeast, which was thought to be the headquarters of Rayful Edmonds' operation. Law enforcement would allege that Edmond allegedly supervised a wholesale and retail illegal narcotics business that brought in 1,700 pounds of the white powdery substance a month from California and employed more than 150 people. At the height of the district's drug epidemic of the late 1980s, business was good, very good. The group generated as much as $2 million a week and controlled perhaps 50% of the cocaine trafficking in the city. The inner working of the Edmonds network sounded like the script from a movie or perhaps a certain HBO series. This was Snowfall, The Wire, Queen of the South, all in one, before TV would ever dramatize the lives of young inner-city black men. They were living the life that people talked about. Much of the cocaine was purchased from the Los Angeles-based Crips gang, which had a direct connection to a Colombian drug cartel. Carriers from Edmond's network would travel to California carrying suitcases full of money, often $3 million or more. After making the purchase, the carriers would return to D.C. by plane or in rented vans filled with drugs. As the Washington Post described it, the bags of cocaine allegedly were distributed to street sellers by lieutenants with names like Mad Dog, Whitey, and Fat Cheese. After selling the crack, the sellers turned in their proceeds to lieutenants. Walkie-talkies were used so the lieutenants, sellers, and lookouts could communicate and ensure that the sellers would not be robbed. The inner circle was a close-knit family organization. They had the blocks on lock, some would say, organized and out for the ultimate prize, the almighty dollar. Lewis and Edmonds ran a business. As illegal as it was still a business. Anytime police came by on patrol, lookouts would shout warnings. Ola Ray, Pig Latin for roller, which back in the day was street slang for patrol car. Tripwires and debris were strewn across alleys to help dealers avoid arrest. Associates spoke in code to disguise their dealings. Street sellers were paid $400 to $800 per week, but could make as much as $5,000 a week. In 1987, that was big money, and they were getting paid. Mules who transported the drugs from LA were paid as much as $1,000 per kilo that they brought to the Washington area. Other carriers were paid for delivering cash to Los Angeles for drug purchases. Enforcers armed with automatic weapons kept away rival dealers and killed those who infringed upon Edmond's territory, which was centered around the open-air drug market at Orleans Place, northeast, but spread to other parts of the city. Over 30 homicides during 1988 and 89 were attributed to clashes between Edmond's network and rival groups. For his own protection, Edmond himself kept a certain amount of distance from the day-to-day dealings of his organization. Instead, he put Tony Lewis at the top. He was not handling the drugs or cash on the street, but the flashy lifestyle the business afforded him, with his fleet of cars, designer clothes, and expensive jewelry, certainly made an impression. As the Post put it, Edmond was something of a walking advertisement for his organization. He was known to have the most and the best stuff. Young men growing up in poverty wanted to be like Edmonds and Tony Lewis. They had become the role models. After all, they had everything that young people thought mattered in life. On September 11, 1989, Lewis, along with his right-hand man Edmonds, went on trial, along with 10 associates, including several family members. Edmond was charged with leading a continuing criminal enterprise, which carried an ultimate sentence of life in prison. Lewis was facing life as well. The trial and the buildup was like a suspenseful movie. DC kingpins were going to trial. Would they win? What would the trial reveal? Authorities implemented unprecedented security measures for the case. The courtroom was equipped with a bulletproof shield separating those involved from spectators. Additional bulletproof panels protected the judge and jurors, and the courtroom was filled with heavily armed U.S. Marshals. In addition, U.S. District Judge Charles R. Ritchie ordered that the jury be sequestered during the trial and their names be kept secret, even from him, on the grounds that jurors' fear of retaliation by Edmond's network could remove any semblance of an impartial jury. To add more to the drama, rather than being detained at a D.C. jail, Edmonds was held at Quantico Marine Corps Base and flown in daily by helicopter. It was a media spectacle. The trial lasted 56 long days. Prosecutors presented Tony Lewis as Edmonds' partner and right-hand man. As for Rayful Edmonds, the story was painted of a young, charismatic, young black man. He was a drug mastermind, according to prosecutors, who had learned the trade from his parents at a young age. Jurors heard vivid descriptions of Lewis and Edmonds' flashy lifestyle, which the prosecution claimed was funded by drugs and, of course, violence. The most damaging piece of evidence was a secretly recorded conversation in which Edmonds' mother, Constance Bootsy Perry, told an associate that her son had started off as a small-time drug dealer, but then just got too big and went out on his own. Defense lawyers at trial would portray Edmonds as a compulsive gambler who earned up to $50,000 per week playing dice and numbers and used his winnings to fund his lifestyle. But the jury, would they believe that story? It was too far-fetched. On December 6th, the jury reached its decision. Tony Lewis and Rayful Edmonds were found guilty on all counts, just before Christmas. For Lewis, the jury found he was guilty of conspiracy, interstate traveling in aid of racketeering, and interstate travel in aid of racketeering with communication devices. In its PSR, the probation office suggested that the Edmond organization had distributed at least 150 bricks of a mixture containing cocaine. Back in the day, that's all they had to prove. Even if you sold 2 or 3 or 4 or 5,000 kilos, the law would only say 150 kilos or more. After enhancements, the PSR's calculations gave Lewis a total offense level of 42, with a criminal history category of 1, dictating a guidelines range of 360 months to life in prison. And the judge found that 360 months or 30 years was far too little, and instead found that life was appropriate for both Tony Lewis and Rayful Edmonds. All of this was based on the testimony of James Minor and others. Minor told the court that on one occasion, he delivered 50 bricks of cocaine for the Edmond organization. Royal Brooks would also tell the jury about storing cocaine for Edmonds. Brooks estimated that the most cocaine he held for Edmonds at one time was anywhere from 90 to 93 bricks. Another time, Brooks picked up a shipment of approximately 56 kilos. Finally, Alta Ray Zanville would testify that she worked part-time for Edmonds by breaking down kilos of cocaine into smaller packages for sale. Between May and December in 1987, Zanville packaged cocaine with Edmonds' co-conspirators about 3 times a week. Each time, the group processed 1 to 2 keys of cocaine. Using those figures, Zanville processed somewhere between 108 and 216 keys of cocaine during that period. The court also found that Lewis was involved in more than 1.5 kilos of crack cocaine. U.S. Attorney J. Stevens celebrated the verdict and said the case was evidence that law enforcement officials stand shoulder to shoulder with people of this community to turn the tide of drugs that have so devastated this city. Edmond maintained his innocence, claiming authorities were looking for someone to blame for the drug problems on the D.C. streets. He said, "I'm not the person the U.S. government is trying to make me out to be." He also said he believed he would have received a fairer trial if the jury had been racially integrated. All 12 jurors in the case were black. "I'm not racist, but white people would have taken their time. They would have gone by the law. This jury never asked any questions about the law. Even me, I'm intelligent, and I studied the legal issues. I didn't understand some of it. I'm not saying they weren't intelligent. They just weren't playing fair. They came in way too quick." Rayful Edmonds was pissed off about the verdict. He thought white people would have found him not guilty. Rayful Edmond was the leader of a multi-million-dollar wholesale and retail cocaine and crack cocaine distributing enterprise in the District of Columbia. The jury found this organization was responsible for distributing at least 150 keys of a mixture of cocaine and 1.5 keys of a mixture containing cocaine base from 85 until April 15, 1989. There were 3 levels of responsibility in the Edmond organization. According to court documents, the highest level of the organization was concerned with purchasing of the cocaine from sources in Cali. The next level of the organization was responsible for the packaging, cutting, and storing of the cocaine in the Washington metropolitan area. This level also included the wholesale operations of the organization, as well as the collecting and counting of monies received from its distribution activities. The third level of the organization was the retail operations, which distributed the cocaine at Morton Place and Orleans Place Northeast, also known as the Strip. On a motion seeking a reduction in sentence, the court said he was the most culpable in this enterprise, and that person was Rayful Edmonds. Quote unquote, of equal culpability would be Tony Lewis, in that he was a partner with Mr. Edmonds and had his own street-level organization in the Bates Street Northwest area. Melvin Butler would also be considered one of equal culpability, in that he served as a broker for them to obtain the cocaine from the Los Angeles, California area. Rayful Edmonds wanted nothing to do with his life sentence and decided that his life would not end at USP Lewisburg. He would cooperate with the government on levels that were unheard of. In Lewisburg, Edmonds made contacts with other inmates who had connections to Colombia's Medellin drug cartel and was soon back in business. Using prison phones, mail, and visiting hours, he brokered deals between the Colombian suppliers and D.C. drug dealers. Edmond would collect calls from prison to associates in D.C., who would then patch him through to contacts in Colombia. He even mediated disputes and persuaded the Colombians not to kill his homies who fell behind in their payments. For his role, Rayful Edmonds was paid handsomely. He earned over $200,000 from a prison cell before the scheme was discovered. But what good would $200,000 do a man who was locked up for life? For Edmond, his second career represented something more basic. As he explained later, at the time, my mindset was, I had to still have people look up to me and prove that I was still capable of making things happen. After all, he was the man. He made big moves. When word of Edmond's new enterprise went public in 1996, then U.S. Attorney Eric Holder blasted the Federal Bureau of Prisons. It is intolerable that criminals who are incarcerated for the precise purpose of protecting our citizens have instead been able to use prison facilities as their home offices for creating and commanding massive narcotic enterprises that have left nothing in their wake but death and destruction. But then, however, the saga of Rayful Edmonds had taken another twist. The same guy, Eric Holder, who was scolding the Federal Bureau of Prisons, was ready to make a deal. In exchange for the government reducing Rayful Edmonds' sentence in 1990, Constance Perry had received a 14-year sentence for her participation in her son's drug ring. Edmonds reached a deal to become a government informant. Operating from inside the prison system, he began setting up drug traffickers on the outside for law enforcement to take down. In 1998, Edmonds' testimony helped convict 11 people on drug trafficking charges. His mother was released from prison, and he was put into the prison system's witness protection program. His current location of incarceration is confidential. In February 2021, U.S. District Judge Emmett G. Sullivan cited Edmonds' cooperation with prosecutors in other drug and homicide cases, and reduced Edmonds' prison sentence for his D.C. case from life without parole to 20 years. However, he still remains incarcerated due to a pending 30-year prison sentence for orchestrating drug deals from the federal penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Rayful Edmonds is likely going home in less than 3 years. But what about Tony Lewis? Today, at the age of 60 years old, he is sitting in a prison cell in Cumberland, Maryland, serving out his life sentence. He was arrested at the age of 27 years old. Today, he is 60. The best years of his life, forever gone. Lost to the streets. Lost to the game where there are no winners. But is he a man deserving of a second chance at life? Since his incarceration, he has completed hundreds of rehabilitative programs, demonstrated excellent behavior, has mentored younger prisoners, and has accepted responsibility for his crimes. While killers and people like his co-defendant Rayful Edmonds are getting out of prison on compassionate release motions and cooperation agreements, Tony Lewis is wasting away. Why do we as society over-incarcerate people that are fully rehabilitated? Tony Lewis is left to wonder. In Tony Lewis's son's words in 2021, they did have a role that they have been held accountable for. But somebody that has served 32 years for a narcotics offense should be given a second chance. And so that's really what this is about. I say, in my own words, free Tony Lewis, a good man who made poor choices, that deserves a second chance to reclaim his life. When the feds hit that door, man, you can see stuff gets real, right? Tony Lewis going to prison at the age of 27 years old. He's 60 now. He went to jail a young man. The best years of his life forever gone. Years that he can never replace. Still fighting in court, trying to get out. Desperate. Like an animal caught in a cage, right? I mean, that's what the game has for you. Tony Lewis should be an example. Is that what you want for your life? He could probably tell you about all the good times that he had. But in the end, I'm sure that he would tell you that, listen, all the good times are nothing compared to the last 32, 33 years that he spent in prison. He'd probably give all the good times back in order to be free. So when you're out there getting money, you want to do your thing. I understand. You want to live lavishly. You want to buy them jeans and live that life that everybody's talking about. Drive them nice cars that look like spaceships. But when the feds hit that door and they put them metal bracelets on, you might never be able to get them off. Let this be a learning lesson, right? Blood on the Razor Wire TV. Until tomorrow, free Tony Lewis. We're out.